David Chaum, and he's from Elixxir. He's sort of the godfather of cryptocurrency, starting back in the late 70s and early 80s at Berkeley. He was the founder of DigiCash, and more recently, for the last few years, he's been actually working on voting, a very timely subject. And now he's really bringing blockchain back to the mainstream again. So I'm very interested to hear his talk, and I hope you'll join me in welcoming David Chaum.
It's wonderful to be here today, and it's kind of hard to see everyone because of the bright lights, but I'm reminded of the time I gave a talk at the National Institute of Standards, who's responsible for the strong cryptography that we use globally. They couldn't get the projectors to work the whole talk, the whole hour. I was trying to talk, and they were constantly saying, "Oh, any minute." There was all this psychedelic imagery appearing on the screen the whole time I was trying to talk. So I guess I can speak here, but today, governments and corporations have most of our data, and they insist that we identify ourselves in the ways that they prescribe in order to gain access to our own data. For the most part. So the way that this is often described in the so-called security space is in terms of three factors. Something you know, like a password or the like, something you have, like a government-issued identity document, for example, and as they say, something you are, which is a biometric, in effect. And today you hear about two-factor authentication and so on. This is all about this paradigm of you being requested to, or forced to, identify yourself to these organizations in the ways they demand in order to get the kind of access to your information. Well, it turns out that I think the cryptocurrencies on blockchain is leading the way towards a new approach, a different approach that actually I've been campaigning for since the very late 70s. And the irony is that, I think this is I guess there is no pointer on this. The irony is that these same phrases, something you know, something you have, something you are, can be applied in this new paradigm equally well, but with very different meanings. So now you create your own keys with your own equipment. You control exclusively access to your own information. And so something you know can be thought of as perhaps the private communication that you have with others, including who you communicate with and when. The so-called social graph, which is key information about yourself. And the something you have, I mean, we're all familiar with cryptocurrencies as a store of value, but there is, of course, a whole movement to try to tokenize other kinds of assets, and this is very exciting. And there's a further aspect of information about you, or related to you, which is information about you that you've sort of earned, or that relates to your health and things like that. So your educational degrees, the things that you've achieved, things that you've paid for, and your reputation, and the whole range of medical and other information related to your physical presence. And so with this new approach, you should be able to control all of this information through keys that you exclusively create and have access to. I think that's a lot of the vision behind blockchain and cryptocurrencies, in fact. So the real question is, okay, how can we actually make this happen now, outside of store value and on a mass scale? How can we really ensure that this vision predominates globally for the whole world population, not just those of us who are lucky to have gotten in early? So, to me, the answer is quite clear. We need WeChat, as we would say in Hollywood, WeChat meets blockchain with breakthrough privacy. I believe that's the main chance for blockchain to really take over, and I've been dedicating myself to trying to make this happen, and I've put a lot of effort into creating some real technological breakthroughs that enable this, and trying to work with the whole community to figure out best ways to actually make this all happen. So, if you look at it from a, say, requirements point of view, consumers aren't going to use a new blockchain-based WeChat if it's like a lot slower, obviously. So the time from sending a payment to the finality, when the payment is irrevocable, and both counterparties know that, it needs to be on the order of 10 seconds. Otherwise, you're asking people to accept something that's much worse than what they already have and what they expect. Same for messaging. Now, I don't want to give the impression that this is some kind of privacy coin or something, but I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that most consumers would not like to have all of their payments, let alone messages, published on a blockchain and transparent for posterity. This is not what consumers expect today. They have an expectation of confidentiality in their payments, and so as not to force, a diminution of what people already have, which would be very difficult to roll out. We need to at least match what's available today, and I think probably people's expectations in this regard are going to increase. There's a lot of trends around. So, as you know from many of you may know from blockchain forensics, there are two issues. One is the linking of your payments to your IP address, or maybe your phone MAC address. And the second issue is the linking of payments to other payments. And actually, and most people don't think much about this, even in this space, the same issues apply in messaging. Okay, this is what sometimes euphemistically now called metadata. We used to call it traffic analysis. It's the most interesting way to learn about people and learn the social graph and so forth, who they talk to and when. current messaging doesn't protect that. But that's okay, we don't have to meet that. So that's not an expectation today, but it is an opportunity to exceed current expectations. Now, if we do succeed with the new WeChat, then of course we'll have to be able to keep it available as the user population grows, and that might mean, for instance, in our planning, a peak capacity which represents a 10x headroom, but of about 100,000 transactions per second in the next half year or so. Later, this could grow by another order of magnitude. So that's a technical challenge, but it's certainly implied by meeting these other requirements. And there's a second thing, which is, in my belief, because I've been in payments for decades, and I had the opportunity to meet with the whole range of players from, visited many central banks and large processors and card companies, and been in the payment space for a long time, and I can tell you that I don't believe governments today would be happy to have a payment system, consumer payment system in their country that would be subject to attack by a national adversary, especially in this environment of cyber warfare and so on. And traditionally, governments have attacked the consumer payment systems of other governments during war by traditional means, paper, counterfeiting, and so on. So, as a matter of national security, you don't want a system that another country could break. And my experience in cryptanalysis, which is mostly not public, but I think it's now public that I broke the codes that were used by SWIFT. It's the so-called SWIFT coder. And I broke a lot of other commercial and governmental codes back in the day with a white hat on. I mean, not as a hacker, but and then they paid me to fix them in many cases. But I can tell you that the types of public key signatures that are used today are the basis for payment security, and blockchain probably aren't something that are secure against attack by a nation state. And so what we need is much more sort of random function type of cryptography, like hash codes and symmetric encryption, and these will necessarily be able to be quantum resistant, but I'm not saying that we have to worry about quantum resistance necessarily immediately, but we will get quantum resistance as a consequence of using the very minimal assumptions of computational difficulty that we can, and that's the prudent thing to do. Of course, if you can, you should always do that in security work. So basically, the main chance for blockchain to go mainstream is to be this consumer app that has messaging and payments, exceeds what can be done today by these, proven, very popular, dominant, and intimately used apps. So, can we solve this problem? As I mentioned, we made these breakthroughs, and we're starting to engage the community and to show the fundamental technology and work with people to see how to apply it. As I mentioned, a natural question is, why hasn't anyone else, can't anyone else do this? I don't know. Apparently not. This is what's needed, plus messaging, plus a kind of new new level of privacy in messaging, I believe, and plus quantum resistance. So how is it that we're able to do this? This breaks the widely known trilemma, for instance. But everyone in the blockchain space that's been in it for a while, I think, had the hope that, and the knowledge that this is really what's needed, and been trying to do it, but no one really has found a way to do it. Why is that? Well, because some fundamental breakthroughs are needed in order to be able to achieve this. I don't see how to do it just by rearranging the currently known and used elements. So I worked really hard to find a breakthrough technology that allows privacy in blockchain. That's the thing that's missing largely at scale. And you can talk about that in detail sometime if you like, but the way to do it is to, instead of like all current blockchains that use a single node to produce each block, right? Different nodes per block, but each block is produced by a single node. We use multiple nodes to produce a block, and this is a teamwork where each node does a different portion of the effort to create the block. So we choose these teams by a distributed, randomized algorithm according to a schedule that makes it very difficult for anyone to manipulate where they are in the schedule. I'm not going to go into all the details, but it's something like the approach that was pioneered by Dash and to a certain extent copied by EOS in that sense, but it's unique in that a whole team of nodes operate. So let me try to give you a sense of how this can achieve privacy by using these silly cartoons, and I hope you'll forgive me, but suppose that Alice wants us to communicate with Bob. So she can use end-to-end encryption with Bob to protect the message content all day long, but what about the who talks to who? The social graph. How can Alice keep secret the fact that she's communicating with Bob? That's something that's not addressed today. So, by messing up. So, the idea here is that we'll have a team of nodes, and I'm only showing 3. I show them by analogy as robots here. And the idea is that they do a lot of work initially to build these physical boxes. So each one makes up its own secret and builds a box that embodies that secret rearrangement of tubing. And they seal these boxes up, and when the time comes, all the users submit messages in a single batch, and the nodes process these very rapidly. And so the messages go through this series of shuffles or reorderings, and now they are rearranged by what we would say is the composition of the permutations. And if you know what that means, you see that the obvious thing is that even if you know some of the shuffles, you won't know which tube Alice's message came out of if you don't know all of the tubing. Right? So that message comes out of the tube and it says in the clear text, please deliver this to Bob, but here's the encrypted end-to-end encrypted message for Bob. So it can be delivered to Bob, and Bob can decrypt it. Also, it's interesting to notice that since we have all this tubing in place, the robots can send an ACK, a little blue check mark, hey, it was delivered to Bob, back through that same tube. So even though they don't know that Alice sent it, Alice will see that Bob got the message. Another thing is that some of these messages could be payment requests. And instead of being addressed to a particular user, they would be addressed to the nodes. And they would be encrypted in a way that all the nodes would have to cooperate to decrypt them, and they would see them more or less at the same time. So we'll come to that now. So the other fundamental innovation, remember, we wanted to get rid of the digital signatures per transaction and speed things up and get the quantum-resistant cryptography. So we had to find a whole new way to do blockchain-based payments. Today, it's always done with, as far as I know, signatures by the owner saying, please move money from this wallet ID to that wallet ID. Back in the mid-90s, using technology which I proposed in the early 80s actually, we did it a different way. It was what we called a digital bearer instrument, a number that was worth money. And so we can apply that approach here to get rid of the signatures and just use hash functions. So let me try to, again, with apologies, get the basic idea, a very simplified form across using this analogy with physical objects. So suppose that Bob wants to receive $1, this simple example, from Alice. So he sends an invoice to Alice. Well, that invoice is actually a hash. It's the hash of a secret, a one-time use secret that Bob makes up. And the combination lock on the outside of the box symbolizes that secret that only Bob knows. And the hash is the number that he gives to Alice as the invoice. So if Alice wants to then pay Bob, she sends two numbers in through the messaging system that I showed you already, which I'm not re-showing here. This provides a certain element of privacy and mixes the payments with the messaging, which is advantageous from a privacy point of view as well, as you may realize. And the robots, or the nodes, do two things. They look at the first number, which is the secret key that Alice made up when she sent the invoice to Joe to get the money in the first place. And they apply the hash, the public hash function, to that secret. In other words, you could say they check that they could open the combination lock of that, which was previously already on the Merkle tree. And if so, then they transfer that $1 value from Alice's hash to Bob's hash, which is placed now in the proper location on the Merkle tree, and Alice's hash is removed. So the tree only contains hashes that have value currently. That's all you need in the system. And so then Bob could, for instance, just look at the hash in the right place, the tree in the right place, and see his hash, and know that he has the money because only he has the secret key that hashes to that value. But because, if you recall, the return path through the nodes that we use to send the blue check mark back to Alice, the nodes can also send back to Alice an actual Merkle signature on the Bob's hash. And then, so there are Lamport signatures on the roots of all the Merkle trees that require the nodes. So Alice can then see definitively that the payment was made final. Bob's hash is on the tree, and she could even then send that signature to Bob. So now the participants have proof of finality without having to burn up a lot of messaging bandwidth or effort. So that's how we can do payments. So we've actually built all this stuff, and it's been running for some months in in alpha. We've been testing out the messaging in-house quite extensively. Automatic deployment to a bunch of clouds, different clouds, and so forth and so on. And we have our own Block Explorer and demos that you could see here of just with 3 nodes on AWS, I think, for the messaging and also the payments. But I think the really interesting thing is that we have also APIs which run on Android and iOS. And those do not use a lot of bandwidth. They don't use a lot of battery because there's very little public key, no per transaction public key. The apps are fast, so it's a perfectly good consumer application with, let's say, blockchain inside. So we have the technology to do WeChat based on blockchain with breakthrough privacy. And I think that's extremely significant, and what this community could really benefit from. However, there's one more piece of the puzzle, right, which is the distributed applications and smart contracts related. And so the question is, well, what about those? Well, if you had mass adoption of a blockchain-based payments and messaging system like WeChat, where consumers didn't have to really recognize the blockchain nature of it, but it had the benefits of blockchain, it was easy to use, then what you would naturally expect is that dApps would run as, in effect, users of this application. That you would communicate with them using the messaging system and make and receive payments with them using the payments facility. That would be the natural integration, like WeChat in China. So how can we do that? Because this would be the most readily available, wide deployment platform for consumers to use these dApps. It would be fantastic for the dApp developers, but we don't want to slow down our chain, because then it wouldn't be a really consumer-friendly app. So we found a way to run the dApps and smart contracts off-chain, sort of on their own chains, the chains that's appropriate for the particular smart contract or dApp, using the so-called multi-party computations, which maybe you've heard about, and you can read about them on my website, if you like, Chaum.com. I did a lot of fun work on these as well, it turns out. Essentially, you already know about at least one of these, because the mixing, which I showed you, is an example of how the secret is divided between those, say, 3 robots. So they all would have to conspire or be compromised in order to know who talks to whom. That's an example of a multi-party computation where the secrets are divided. It turns out that you can do this in general. We proved that. You can also do it in practice for a wide range of dApps, and I have some extra knowledge about a reason why this will be possible for essentially all dApps in the near future. But essentially, the idea is that the dApp communicates with the chain using a multisig, and that allows it to have a presence as a user that is secured by a distributed computation. So, I'd like to invite everyone here, the whole community, to join in and help us take the blockchain mainstream. Really looking forward to working with you all to let this technology reach its true potential. Thank you.